All right, folks. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking mindset. So maybe approach this with a little bit of a open mind. But I just got done with a leadership seminar that I'm in the kind of business mastermind group out there, and occasionally they'll bring out these speakers to come and talk to us and told us like, hey, a lot of y'all are like type A wound up professionals and leaders of companies, and just very different than the average person out there. And I think that's where sometimes, at least speaking for myself, we can get a little impatient when working with people who aren't wired the same way or our children. This person said, hey, this is why certain people are leaders or high up in the org chart for these reasons. And it gave the analogy, and I thought I shared this story analogy because it really jolted me to some extent. So the situation is all of us have been in the airport when that dreaded beep comes on and we're like, oh no, it's delayed. And of course, the announcement comes on and says, all right, LAX has been delayed. Your flight's going to be delayed an hour and a half for mechanical issues. At this point, look around and observe everybody, including yourself. What most people will do is they will go through an emotional digest of this event. They'll get upset. They'll get upset at the announcer person. They'll get upset at the desk. They'll move up. A very small amount of people, such as myself, looking proactively what the next thing to do, right? And what I realized, and I'm like, doesn't everybody do that? But then I started to think, and I was like, I remember when I'm at an airport, everybody gets pissed off around you, most people. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm not like most people, right? Most people have to digest things emotionally. I think you're the same way, Paul. You're a little bit similar to myself. Some would call us a little unemotional.
I think you're onto something there. But this is a interesting topic because it really goes to illustrate just different coping mechanisms, right? And is one way necessarily better than the other, right? Is dwelling on something or talking about the emotions the preferred way to go, or should we all just quickly find a way to move on to the next thing, right? It makes us wonder, right, what the pros and the kind of cons are.
Although I would probably restrain myself in saying there's a
Yeah.
better way of doing this and getting proactive, the over the bridge. But that's not the point. The point is people digest things in different ways. And I think
Yeah.
that was my takeaway.
Yeah, it reminds me of that video. It's the video of a man and a woman talking, right? And there's a nail sticking out of the woman's forehead. And so the woman is describing this dull, aching pain in the on the top of her head, and the man is just trying very hard not to say, pull the damn thing out. And the message of the story is it's not about the nail. It's about emoting and showing understanding instead of just presenting, here's the solution. A lot of our listeners would probably relate to this, right? Whether it's in their relationships at home or right, relationships with others.
And awareness of is one thing I think most of us adults have realized. That's it. When you're the person with the nail sticking out of the head,
Yeah.
it is very hard to have that self-awareness of where you're at. Just like how I called myself on going to this presentation. I didn't realize that I'm one of these weirdos that just in the midst of the chaos at the airport desk and the yelling and screaming, I'm the one who just gets up and goes to the service desk to get in line and just get ready.
Yeah.
Not many
Yeah.
people do that. But when you're like a leader of people, you need to account for people's range of emotions or taking that viewpoint to your spouse and your family too.
Yeah. In the airport example, I would venture to say that there is a big advantage to having that first mover advantage, right? Because if everyone's delayed and there's only a finite number of seats on the next available flight, there's a practical benefit of being one of the first to rebook your flight rather than dwelling and letting an hour pass by before you do something, right? Which actually makes the situation worse. In a larger organization, right, if you're dealing with people and different relationships, then I could see how there's more at play. There's a lot of different relationships and feelings that you're dealing with.
The other example that was used in this presentation, it provides a little bit of humor too, and maybe it's a little bit counterintuitive. They talked about this African safari metaphor where you have all the gazelle drinking water or hanging out.
Yeah.
And so what the lions will do is they'll roar and work in a team to have one lion roar from one side and somehow bounce his voice. So the gazelles know that the lions are always screaming with them, so that they've instinctively learned over time to run towards the roaring lion, even though Obviously, if something's roaring at you, run the opposite way. It's counterintuitive, but effective. And I think this metaphor may not be right, and I still don't quite understand it, but maybe it can just be a mechanism for our normal gut reaction to do things may or may not be correct in certain situations. And if your tendency is to do one thing, take notice of that, have the self-awareness, and maybe try something different in that respect.
Yeah, that's an interesting metaphor, the ones of the gazelles running towards the roaring lion. But yeah, I think it's also very applicable to a lot of tough situations that we might face or any of our listeners might face, right? What do you do when you're confronted with a tough challenge, right? What do you do when you get hit in the jaw? What do you do when you hit in the face? Right? Do you fight back or do you go the other way? And so I think that there's a lot of parallels to how do you react when something unexpected happens.
Or yeah, thinking of things of to try to do the opposite of your natural tendency. Somebody comes up to you at work or even just some random person and berates you and yells at you. Your ego may want to hit it head on, right? Especially if they're coming at you with total bogus accusations. But in many cases, I would say it might be best to just diffuse the situation and come back at it later than to hit it head on. And that might be an example of doing kind of the opposite of what your natural tendency is.
It's hard, right? Because we all have that fight or flight or freeze response, which is built into us. It's a protective mechanism that we've developed over the course of evolution to deal with threats. But sometimes that can get us into trouble, right? For example, if you're in a corporate setting and your boss or your manager says something, like even if it's very unfair, if you fight back, argue back, say curse words back, that's probably not going to lead to a very productive outcome in the end. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to try to swallow it and walk away and diffuse the situation.
Which is an example of a tactic. I call it bottom up approaches, but a similar top down mindset approach to something like that is what I talked about earlier. People do certain things, even somebody who's senior to you, your boss, who should know better, to just have that understanding that people are emotional and they can act different ways in different situations, even violently towards you in that respect, to have the understanding that people do that. And that can help you digest things in a way.
Right.
I'm curious, what are other methods for people when things get elevated and they just need to chill out? One of them, meditate and imagine you're in an igloo with penguins in your happy zone. What are some in the moment tactics that you've used with your folks?
Yeah, there's a few things you could do. One, for example, is setting a time limit, right? Whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes, that's the time that you allow yourself to feel all the emotions that you want and to process them, right? But then you set the timer. After that timer is up, then you fully immerse yourself in moving forward, right? And taking action and getting yourself out of that predicament, right? But you give yourself a finite amount of time to process those emotions. So if you want to go yell, kick, and scream, cry, go ahead and do that. But once the timer's up, move on. Yeah.
An appropriate amount of time too, right? Like certain things are a 2 minute thing. Somebody cuts you off. Other things could be weeks, super tragic events.
So it really depends. For example, this airport scenario, you probably want to keep it to a manageable amount of time. Like, you know, dwelling on this for hours. Right?
Yeah, because you end up bringing all these other people down. It's like when you pick up Uncle Barry and still complaining about the flight was delayed. Jeez.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe nobody's picking you up, and that's a reason why, because you act like that. I've got another one that I've seen used in different situations, but this one can be used as a universal hack to visualize yourself in like close your eyes if you need to, but visualize yourself third person and then zooming out from like a top down, like seeing the top of your head, seeing your city, your state, your continent, your world, solar system. I don't know what's bigger than that. But then I think the purpose is you start to see how little you are in a big thing and how the world keeps moving without you and your place in the universe in a way. And that maybe just that exercise helps slow things down as part of it too.
Yeah.
I've also heard that used for if you have to make a big speech or presentation or like something where you're nervous.
That's the power of perspective, right? Just realizing that in the grand scheme of things, how important this is really. And then just zooming out, having that macro view is like, it just makes you realize how small you are.
We,
Uh-huh.
we had that one guest on. She talked about the 5, 4, 3, 2,
Five, four,
1.
three, two, one technique. That's a technique to quickly shift your focus from a stressful situation to being in the present moment, right? So I believe that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's identify 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Just a mnemonic to help you shift your focus from things that you can't control to something that
Yeah.
physiologically helps you regain calm your sympathetic nervous system, and then allows you to act and think more rationally.
Yeah. If anything, I see it as just slowing you down.
Yeah. Another technique, I think I got this from Tony Robbins, is the language that pay attention to the language that we tend to use, right? When bad things happen, when unexpected things happen, right? If something unfortunate happens and you say something like, I'm so screwed, here we go again, that language, it's very heavy. It makes that problem seem very big, right? Whereas if you get into the habit of reacting to bad things, that's interesting, no matter how bad the thing that happened is, then it makes light of it. And it's a very different feel when you say that to yourself versus, here we go again. I'm so screwed. Like, why does this always happen to me?
Or I always do this. It always happens to me.
Yeah, like that language, it's just so heavy and it just drags you down, right?
You're
Yeah.
saying is like your words influence your
Yeah.
thoughts influence your actions. You know what's funny? Maybe because I don't hang out with people like that, I don't notice people doing that type of stuff around me. But sure enough, you find somebody who is a little bit out there or younger people. What you're saying is common, right?
Yeah.
It's a tell, it's an obvious tell where their mindset is.
I think I'm just thinking about like people that I coach or even with my own kids, right? Trying to get them into the habit of just using different language to themselves, right? So whether it's calling something interesting, if something bad happens, or just completely reframing it, right? So instead of reacting with such heavy negative words, flip it around, flip it 180 and say, hey, oh, like the flight that got delayed. Oh, good. What can you learn from the moment? So the language that you use can like, really set you on the path to see things in a different light, and that'll guide your next steps.
Yeah. This can also be like people sometimes they'll make fun of themselves. There is some kind of truth behind what they're saying, right? How they use it as a crux. Like something bad happens and oh, it's because it's always happens to me or
Yeah. Oh, I'm such a black cloud, or oh, why am I always the unlucky one?
and I think unfortunately as adults, we have the freedom to not hang out with those types of people. So those people get worse and worse. Whereas if it was your kids, you correct that shit right away. You have the ability to step in. But I think that's the hard thing. It's not that it's a bad person, it's just bad habits, essentially. I just
Yeah,
keep moving down that.
correct. Yeah.
We diverged there and just to wrap this one up, getting back to that airport situation. One of my takeaways too is obviously people digest things different ways, but also positive things too, right? I
Mm,
used the example of a negative thing, the airplane being late, but positive things too, like when good things happen, you win the game or something good happens. I'm one to say like, all right, next, don't strain your shoulder when you're patting yourself on the back. Let's
okay.
just get back to business, right? Keep working the
Yeah.
plan. But I think in the same way, most people do need to feel that victory, right? And part of this, I think, is I don't work with other adults with this stuff. I stay out of that. But I think the kids, right? Like I'm a parent and getting praises on even on small stuff.
Yeah.
Lately, my daughter just going poop at the toilet. It's not a slam dunk type of stuff.
This is something I've had to work on personally as well, especially coming from an upbringing where there was very little positive reinforcement, right? If anything, it was a negative reinforcement. I think a lot of our listeners or like those from certain immigrant backgrounds can attest to this. So if you come home with a 96, it's not good job. It's
What's up with the 4 missing ones?
yeah, what's
Right?
happened with the 4 missing? And if they're extra credit points, like why did you miss those two? In long term, like that can lead to some not so good consequences, right? So it is important to reflect when things go well, right? Because learning doesn't just come from failures, but also comes from doing well, right? And so taking the time to realize what went right is also really important. And conversely, when something unfortunate happens, and like going back to what we were talking about, it's not about the nail, right? So if it's one thing, if something unfortunate happens to just you in a moment, then you can quickly move on. But if you're with, let's say, a spouse who doesn't operate the same way, or you're with other people who don't operate the same way, then I think a reminder, is it about the nail or is it about the problem? Or is it about the problem, but also those around you? What's more important, the problem or your relationship with your spouse or the people you're with? And I think if presumably the relationship with the spouse or those you're with is very important, right? So I think that's where it becomes very important to take the time to be understanding and to emote, right? For those of us who may find it challenging to express emotions in that moment, right? Because there are some long-term benefits to getting your emotions out and processing it, because if you don't and you always just quickly move on, then that's how negative emotions build up. And then at some point, they're going to come out, and probably in a not always in a very healthy manner. Yeah.
And
So,
your clients, if anything, they fall in the latter category where they hit a certain layer of success, they're
mhm.
high performers, and they just realize like I hit the 94 or 96 and I'm still not super satisfied as it is. As opposed to what we are talking about earlier, where the guy just beats themselves. Like those guys typically never even get any lift off the ground in a way.
Correct.
You don't really deal with too much of that, presuming.
Not too many, but I do, right? Because like I think most of us, we could be successful in one area of life, right? Like we could be very successful in, say, athletic pursuits, right? Or certain extracurricular activities, but in the wealth building or career phase, like we might have more challenges, and vice versa, right? Some people, they're so good at their work, right? But those successes, those skills, they don't translate into something like relationships, right? So in realms where perhaps they're a little bit imbalanced, or they're not finding success as easily, that's when these issues might come up, right? Where they might need to lean on some skills that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, in a way, they're compensating, right? They may
Yeah,
not outwardly be their own worst critic, but
yeah,
they're able to hide it very well,
right.
and it's holding them back.
Correct. And a lot of times, for a lot of us type A folks, we'll tend to focus on the things that we're naturally good at. So I think for like a good number of our listeners, that could be a job or career. Like when things get tough, you just double down on what you're good at. That in itself can be a coping mechanism. Yeah, but it is important to realize that bigger picture, to take that macro view, zoom out, look at the big picture, right? In the grand scheme of things, like how important is success in this one particular realm, right? How are all the other realms in your life doing? Yeah.
Yeah, just a good conversation today. I thought I had a couple aha moments there, so I wanted to share with everybody. I think what we're putting together in the future is a workbook to
Mm.
somewhat memorialize a lot of these kind of random discussions we seem to be having. Maybe a good giveaway on this one might be that wheel where you have like the 10 different facets of your life, like
Huh?
work, fitness, spouse, friends. Yeah, the wheel of
Yeah,
life where
the way of
you
life. Yeah, that's a great tool. And then if folks are interested in an online quiz, like I developed a 5 elements quiz. This is based on some tenets of traditional Chinese medicine, but it again deals with various different elements of yourself, right? So we all tend to have one or two areas that we're naturally good at, and the others, they're also equally important, because without them, like, your natural strengths won't be as good without them. But a lot of times we tend to just focus on what comes easy to us. So if folks are interested in learning more about themselves in that realm, they can go to my website, drpobu.com/quiz.
or just email poll. But we'll see you guys on the next episode.